The next part I want to talk about is the CPU. The CPU is the part that's going to be running all of the applications on your computer. It will also be part of the multitasking that you do on the computer. You're going to see CPUs from two different main manufacturers. The first one is Intel, who tends to have better single core performance compared to AMD, who tends to have better multi-core performance and more cores. It's arguable which one you should prefer, and instead you should look at the performance of the CPUs individually and compare them based on their price. The things to look for in a CPU is the core count, the threads per core, and the core clock. The core clock is an estimate of the performance your CPU can get, but instead you should be looking at benchmarks in the applications that you plan to run to see their real-world performance. Moving on to core count and threads per core, that is going to be the baseline for the multi-core performance and the multitasking that you can do on the CPU. If an application is able to use multiple cores, that will increase the performance, but it will also help with multitasking as applications will be able to run on individual cores or individual threads. Speaking of the CPU, I want to talk about the CPU cooler. As you probably guessed, the CPU cooler's job is to keep the CPU cool. To measure the performance of the cooler, you should check the TDP, or thermal design power. Make sure that this is more than the CPU, so that way it can be adequately cooled. Some CPUs will also come with a stock cooler. This is basically the bare minimum that your CPU will need to stay cool, but I recommend getting an aftermarket one, especially if you plan to overclock. There are some compatibility checks you'll need to do with the CPU cooler. First, if you're going to use an air cooler, you need to make sure it does not impede on a RAM slot, or if it does impede on a RAM slot, that you will not use that RAM slot and it will not be needed. If you're going to use a water cooler, make sure your case can support it either at the top or the front of the case. That way you can mount it there.